was going to leave this on to do uh, a little segment about the translation of the Latin and the Greek and the classical languages, which is the initial cause of the confusion about medieval legal concepts. In a feudal system, there was a somewhat more ambiguous to you relationship between public and private things, but to them, it was still the most important distinction in the world. That's why you see them executing people for heresy and sectarian schism, because they still defined a difference between public and private things. It was just a difference, a temporal difference, because of the communication systems laid out in advance. So the nobleman was specifically selected because he knew when he was supposed to become a public servant. If the enemy arrived in the nobleman's territory, he wasn't going to go all the way to Paris or Rome to be enlisted in the service, right? So it was prearranged. And it was prearranged by the people who had the books, which were written by hand. So you have to understand the legal code in medieval times. In order to do that, you have to read Latin, because for 1,000 years, all of Christian doctrine is written in Latin or Greek. And if you don't understand it, you're going to be bamboozled by the ghost, by the spirit of the medieval feudal legal concepts. And what you need to understand it is very simple. First of all, you need a verse marker, like the Bible, right? You need to read St. Augustine. You need to read the writings of the saints, the writings of the doctors of the church, the law itself. The doctors are, and the colleges and universities are referenced in the law. And you need to read them with a marker at the end of the sentence so you can comprehend the grammar. Because every sentence consists of a subject, a predicate, and a number of modifiers on either one. Grammar becomes infinitely less complicated if you mark the end of the sentence, right? This is the most important thing to do. You don't need any person to teach you Latin or Greek or any other language at all. If you want to learn German, it's the same thing. All you need is a text, especially a legal text, a translation, and a verse marker at the end of the sentence so you can comprehend the grammar and learn the grammar. If your translator is not showing you the original text, you're being defrauded. And if in the original text there's a different number of periods in the original text and the translation, you're being defrauded. The sentence and the clause is a totally universal concept. If you're not translating the same number of sentences and the same number of words, more or less in the sentence, concepts, then the translator is trying to tell you that the book says something that it doesn't. And it's going to give you schizophrenia, because what else are they going to be talking about but coming to your country, calling it an imperial fief, and getting in the business of girls? What else, right? So the other thing you need is the transliteration, right? I really don't believe that you need any complex. A person doesn't have to transliterate Greek. You just make one letter into one letter or two letters maximum. A diphthong is perfectly sufficient to render the Greek alphabet into the Latin alphabet. This is all a ridiculous, egotism. You don't need anything. One Greek letter becomes two Latin letters, or one Latin letter automatically. It can be translated by a computer, transliterated, and then the translation, all you need is the original text. The earliest known translation is usually the best because they are the most aware of the concepts. If you translate something 200 years later, you're really not going to know what they were talking about or be able to translate it. So the earliest known translation with a verse marker by clause or by sentence so that you can comprehend the grammar, right? And since doctors are public contractors and their masters that they certify are their names are a matter of legislative record, all of this with the parties on the ballot in a modern Republican system should be in your national archives, going back to the ancient legal codes, which the government should absolutely have if they are not completely treacherous in a religious war, because public record is all anybody's fighting about in a religious war. The sectarian fundamentalists want you to go to their school because they got a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, and they think that they own the law and the legislative records and the court records of your nation, the ancient ones, the earliest ones. So that's the whole thing we're fighting about. That's all anybody's fighting about in a religious conflict. Okay? And they're going to steal your identity. They're going to move around between ethnic groups, and they're going to say that they're the Germans and they're fighting you. And then somebody else is going to say that he's you and he's fighting the Germans because he owns the public record, and the public record is where your name is certified. Okay? So this is of the utmost importance, and the only thing you need to understand with the unnatural prolonged extension of the feudal legal concepts, wherein the law was kept in the nobleman's house of necessity because it was handwritten, and the nobleman, the lord, is the one with the legislative record in his house and the court records. So the extension, the unnatural prolongation, the extension of the feudal social contract, the aristocracy itself being the problem, because the Western aristocracy already since 1750 has been a bunch of Arabian sons of women sold to the latter-day aristocracy and bourgeoisie in the West, right? So all you need to understand is how to disabuse yourself of the feudal legal contract, which ended and does not at all apply to our modern economic systems or our information systems, right? So even though the Bible is still the law, nothing that they're talking about in the Bible is going on now. None of the feudal laws apply to our situation. So in order to argue that, you have to understand Latin and Greek. And therefore, you're going to need a translation, the earliest known translation, into English or your language, marked by sentence so you can understand the grammar, and transliterated in a predictable automatic fashion with one Greek letter for one Latin letter, or two English letters for one Greek letter, automatically. And you could understand the entire problem, and there wouldn't be any religious conflict going on.